Hello, I'm Luke Hartledge. My literature assessment was intended to be surrounding the online sports gambling policy. Most of the academic literature here, though, is centered around like the peripheral aspects of this. For example, there are a lot of articles on youth gambling, general online gambling, or perhaps sports gambling without the online aspect. There are also a lot of articles about whether online gambling should be legalized and how it should be regulated from a consumer protection standpoint. Additionally, some of the best data came from articles focused on the United Kingdom, where sports betting has been widely legalized for much longer than it has been in the United States. Some of the best articles about addiction in particular were focused in Canada, which is a country that has been much more experimental and proactive in destigmatizing addiction. So my original research question was, how do varying minimum age requirements to gamble on sports affect addiction rates, tax revenue, and social outcomes? In the United Kingdom, where there is considerable scholarship on gambling due to the many years that it's been legal and widely accessible, the minimum age to gamble there is 18. However, in the United States, most states require a bettor to be 21 years old. It would be worthwhile to understand how one of the most important policies that regulate gambling, such as age restrictions, influence outcomes for gambling consumers and their communities. It is worth noting that other cultural and demographic factors would need to be considered as well when it comes to gambling habits being compared between the United Kingdom and the United States. Academic research is generally split on its slant toward whether online sports gambling should be legal or if it's a net positive. One of the most often cited articles on online sports gambling is about the United Kingdom, where again, this is not a new industry. So David Forrest and Robert Simmons talk about the corporate incentives that professional leagues and even amateur leagues, such as like the NCAA, like what they have to gain by partnering with online gambling companies. Even though their article takes on a somewhat supportive view of online sports gambling, they do acknowledge the downsides. So, for example, if there's no barrier to entry to betting on sports, they acknowledge that there's more likely to be widespread fixing of games by players, coaches, and officials. This article also talks about where gambling revenue goes when it comes to the government collecting taxes on it. They call it feel-good programs. So kind of like in the United States, where it's common for lottery revenue to go towards education. In the United Kingdom, it's common for the revenue to go towards their Olympic programs, their Olympic athletes and their facilities, as well as amateur sports facilities and programs. So when it comes to how much of this money goes towards rehab facilities or addiction counseling, it's kind of harder to find that in academic articles, but this information is probably available in public records on state and local budgets. So it was actually a German study that I found about online gambling that had the largest sample size and showed how online gambling affected gambling tendencies and behavior in general. For example, online gambling resulted in about a 12.5% increase in addictive tendencies compared to going to in-person casino gambling. They also studied the social burden of online gambling and determined that the increase in problematic gambling behavior cost the German health sector an equivalent of about $30 million per year, showing a net negative in revenue there. The authors of this article also talked about the challenges of having reliable data for a much larger sample size. So by talking about their methodology and trying to get true quantitative data here, the amount of time that the bettors spent playing, the intensity with which they bet, so how often or how much they were betting after taking a loss, for example, or the influence of the website that they played on, were not well accounted for, and the authors acknowledge this. Just talking about the websites there for a second. So for example, if different websites are designed differently and are effective at different levels of keeping players on their sites. So that's something that was very difficult for them to quantify. One area where I can expand my research is by including a little more scholarship on the 2019 Murphy versus NCAA Supreme Court ruling that overturned PASPA, PASPA, which is an abbreviation for the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act. And so it's this Murphy versus NCAA ruling that essentially allowed states to legalize sports gambling. So the article I originally found was how this Supreme Court ruling would affect tribal gaming specifically. However, I found another book on JSTOR called Marijuana Federalism, Uncle Sam and Mary Jane. And what this book does, it has an entire chapter dedicated to sports gambling's legalization process and how it parallels marijuana legalization. I also found a third article titled Integrity Fees in Sports Betting, which talks about how anti-fixing measures such as integrity fees and taxes have been promoted by sports leagues as well. So I think adding these to my bibliography, adding these to my research can provide a little more context as far as the differences between online sports gambling in the United States and other countries. Legal issues around sports betting have evolved a lot in the 7 years since the Murphy ruling, so I think a lot of analysis on this could help. Looking forward to hearing your guys' feedback. Thanks.